Welcome to the Fitness Industry Council of Canada webinar, the pulse of Canadian fitness business. Brought to you by our sponsors including Matrix, ISOFIT, Stay Above Nutrition, and Zoom Media.
Wonderful. Well, it is just after 1 o'clock. Thank you,
Hi, Fiona.
everyone, for joining us today. My name is Zach Weston. I'm the Executive Director here at the Fitness Industry Council of Canada, and very pleased, as always, to be joined by the fabulous Erin Phelan, our Director of Marketing and Communications. We really enjoy, hosting these events on a monthly basis to connect and share, some information with regards to the fitness industry. We have a mix of, topics that we discuss, from owner-operator concerns to equipment manufacturer topics that we're going to discuss today. And from time to time, we also get into some of the exercise science. But before we go too far, I'm very pleased to acknowledge the support from our sponsor, premier sponsor, Matrix, and of course, very fitting that we have Greg Lawlor with us today from Matrix. And we're also acknowledging the support from Stay Above Nutrition. As a trade association, we can't do what we do without the support of our members and our sponsors. And having a voice with government is so critically important for our business and for our industry. And we had a conversation a couple months ago with Chris Smith from Fitness World, and he very eloquently stated that if you're in business, you're in politics. And if you want to have a seat at the table, you have to have some mechanism to do so. And as the National Trade Association voice for the fitness sector in Canada, the Fitness Industry Council of Canada, we need your support. If you're not a member yet, we encourage you to consider joining the fitness industry. And sorry that my screen share isn't quite showing everything. There we go. If you haven't joined the Fitness Industry Council yet, or some of your friends who are in the fitness business haven't joined yet, please have them connect with me and share with them the importance of being part of the voice of the fitness sector across Canada, not just in the tough times, but in all times. So without further ado, our guest speaker today has been an absolute pillar of the Canadian fitness ecosystem for over 3 decades. Greg has actually has started his journey through his passion for movement as a phys ed teacher before transitioning to the commercial fitness sector in the mid-90s. He went on to co-own Stack Fitness, building it into one of the most progressive fitness supply and education organizations in Canada, which was acquired by Johnson Health Tech in 2015. Over this past decade, Greg has driven monumental growth across commercial and retail segments as Vice President of Business Development. And today, he leads the charge as President of Johnson Health Tech Canada, overseeing an industry-leading portfolio of global brands, which includes Matrix Fitness Canada. So please give a warm welcome and a virtual welcome to our true educator, strategist, and industry leader, Greg Lawlor. Greg, so great to have you here. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I've got to make sure we record that introduction so I can play that on repeat. And when I have those days that we often do where there's bumps in the road, I'm going to play that. I mean, and try not to feel old, the 30 plus years, and trying to get enough energy to get through the day. So no, thank you. It's a lot of fun and always a great day, Zach and Erin and Sarah and everyone, to discuss the industry that we're so passionate about. And so I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Erin, I'll turn things over to you to begin our conversation.
Well, first off, because I'm in charge of the waiting room, I want to thank the great teammates that I see actually as well live. So I see a lot of our Vision team here, and I see a few of our Matrix team as well, which is lovely to see because we're always learning from each other in this company and in this industry, which I love. And I feel very grateful to be a part of it. So if you haven't muted yourself, I tried to mute everyone coming in, but please do mute yourself. So, Greg, let's start off with I think this is one that's going to be really important to most watching or hear live. How do the current economic and operational realities in Canada, how are they impacting how clubs are scaling today compared to a few years ago?
Well, maybe the more accurate question is how are they not impacting? The answer is on multiple levels, and we can talk to operators of all facilities of all sizes to get a real glimpse of the realities of the economics, and that trickles down obviously to the people that we serve, to the consumers and the patrons that frequent our facilities, regardless of what level they are at in pursuing a more active lifestyle. The economic realities for them are very, very different than they were a few years ago. It seems like a lifetime ago, but 5 years ago we were in the midst of COVID. So when we talk about a few years ago, and everybody on this call knows the realities of how that impacted the commercial fitness business and the fitness industry in general. And in Canada, first I'd say in this position as a vendor and talking to operators and spending time in facilities across the country and the world, we're in a very interesting and unique position to get a perspective of some of these realities. And I would say that in knowing what I know and seeing what I've seen from dealing on a global level with colleagues and travels through different facilities, Canada was one of the last countries to come back on board, I would say, after COVID. And that translates to operators in multiple ways, right? So operators have seen a massive influx and an increase of operating across the board, whether that's rent or utilities or payroll or we've tried on the equipment side to keep that as stable as possible, understanding that the cost of doing business has gone up dramatically. When your question is how the clubs scale, the scaling of a business for multiple facility operators has been limited in many ways because the access to financing has been much more difficult in the fitness industry than it has been prior to COVID, for example. So unfortunately, fitness restaurants and movie theaters are grouped into the red flag category by lenders and financial organizations, and so it's in the best interests of operators to have some fiscal foresight, if you will, and some planning to be able to carefully look at overhead, carefully look at refreshes, carefully, and we'll get into some of those topics, I'm sure. But the reality at the end of the day is that we need to be more careful. We need to spend more time on market research. We need to understand our consumers better. We need to make sure that our operation is scalable, it's feasible, it's sustainable, regardless of what side of the industry you're on. And it's no different than what I've had to do in my role here with Johnson and Matrix and Vision over the last couple of years and taking over this role. It's looking at operational costs like nothing's the same. For the consumer, wow, like they have more options than they've ever had before, and they're more discriminating with where they spend their dollar because they have to. We don't have to go much further than the grocery store to figure that out, that the dollar does not stretch like it did. So the value offering has to be different than it was years ago. It has to be better to be able to allow those that we serve to see the benefits of being part of a facility and an organization for their active living. So there's a lot of economic realities. In fact, it drives the whole engine and it impacts everybody on every level, from the consumer to the operator. Those are just a couple of examples.
Well, Greg, you mentioned COVID, and that's probably still a nightmare in the memories of most of the folks in the fitness sector in Canada. And thanks to the leadership at the Fitness Industry Council of Canada during that period of time, and I won't take credit for that because I was not here, but Sarah Gilbert, who's on our call, certainly championed the leadership to bring us back. but I do want to highlight how hard it was here in Canada. And I had a conversation just last week when I was supporting some of the government advocacy work in Washington with the HFA. And some of the operators in Minnesota were complaining about how hard they had it in Minnesota when they were closed for about 45 days. And I shared with them that in Canada, we were closed for over 400 days. And it just left them speechless. They had nothing to respond. They just couldn't understand how we even have a fitness sector in Canada following that. Difficult times, but to move on, we've got some other topics to discuss. From your vantage point, Greg, at Johnson Health Tech, how has the Canadian fitness consumer evolved, and what would you say they are prioritizing today that they weren't focusing in on 5 years ago? And perhaps what are the biggest trends influencing equipment purchasing decisions today?
Well, we could have a discussion around the table on how the consumer has evolved, but I think a lot of there's a few common points that we see, and hopefully folks on the call see. One is everybody in every walk of life has access to more information. There's constant information coming at us from all areas, and that can be good and that can be challenging. But our consumer, those that we serve, have more information at their fingertips. How does that translate to what we see in facilities and commercial fitness? Well, they're willing to try new things, maybe a little bit more than they did in the past. They're open to more diverse training and requesting more diverse training experiences. So we've seen a growth of functional training, functional strength training, and that's not new in the last couple of years. Our friends at TRX introduced the suspension trainer in 2008, 2005, and it really took off in 2009, 2010. So functional strength training in general, that's more diverse training. We see, demand now for high rocks training. I think the move is official, that it's moving away from exercise to training. The difference being that there's a goal, there's a target, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the experiences provided in facilities have to be more diverse. If you turn back the clock, at one point it was cardio and some strength, and then at another point there was a segment over here that was bodybuilding and focused on strength. Then another point it became HIIT training, and then another point. So I think all of those are kind of coming to fruition, and I think that it's the operators are realizing, and what we're seeing in facilities across the country and the world for that matter, but certainly in Canada, is the experience has to be more diverse, which means that people have to, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, but they have to look carefully at how they manage their space. In some markets across the country, and there's limited space. You go to the Lower Mainland, as our friends there can tell you, there's not room for expansion. You got to do more with what you have. So how do you repurpose some space to be able to accommodate some of these needs, some of these requests that are coming through the front door? And we're not just seeing this in the gym market. We're seeing this in all markets that offer fitness. We're seeing hotel and condo fitness facilities that are looking at functional spaces that they've never, ever considered in the past. So it's in what the gym industry does, it sets the bar to other amenities, whether that be in the university market or whether that be in the condo market or corporate fitness market. They are setting the bar, and that's where the trends are playing out first in our gyms and in our commercial facilities. So those are some of the areas that the consumer has evolved, and where operators are prioritizing their offering, maybe that they weren't as much a few years ago. And that those trends are influencing equipment vendors. We get caught up in a lot of stuff. Everybody gets caught up in their own agenda, but at the end of the day, we have to be in a position to answer what the market wants. And those are the vendors that are the ones that are the difference between those that may be here today that won't be here tomorrow and those that have been around for a while is it's constantly evolving. And that's part of the energy on our side of the industry is what is the market pushing for, asking for, and how do we support the market? How do we support our operators across Canada? And in Canada, we have a limited market compared to the US and compared to many countries. There's not, it's not an ever evolving brand new list of facilities that are emerging. It's customers and organizations that have been around for a while and relationships and trust and credibility that
Can
any
I bug you to
vendors.
help me with the TVs? Something changed.
I've just muted some people.
I can't help you with the TVs, but we could talk about that later. Maybe what time's the World Cup start? Maybe that's what's going on.
6
Oh,
p.m.
all right.
Vancouver.
Can't be that. All right. Let's stay on trend. But so the physical footprint and space management, that's what's trending in terms of driving purchases, refreshes, capital, updates to organizations. And so that's how they're all kind of linked together. The consumer has evolved, which is pushing operators to evolve, which is pushing vendors to kind of stay up with all of that as well. And so, regardless on what side of, as an exerciser, I know what I see in the facilities I go to, and I can see that the space management is very different in facilities regardless of the size. And so everybody else has to get in line, the operators, the vendors, et cetera.
I think Aaron's going to, jump on that and talk about the layout, but I will share, your comment with regards to hotels. I've really appreciated and enjoyed seeing the progression of inclusion of functional fitness types of equipment, kettlebells, and so forth that years ago I would never see in a hotel. And of course, I'm seeing top quality equipment in those settings as well.
Well, we can go down that rabbit hole, but just quick stories about an evolution of one side of the industry. If you look at the hospitality market, they've created brand standards for their fitness offering, similar to what they'll have in every other aspect of what they're offering, whether it's furniture, whether it's lighting, whether it's the beds that they offer and the cleanliness of their facility. Now it's applied to fitness, A, in the space that they have, and B, what they have inside that space. Well, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even when I started many moons ago, 30 years ago, the hotel offering was an afterthought, if they had anything at all. It was someone's treadmill from their relative of whoever owned or whatever they got down the street at the big box store. They brought that in because this became, one of their guests had interest in having a place to get on the bike in the morning or whatever it was. That's completely different. Some of these bigger facilities rival what we see in gyms in terms of hotels. So it's a real evolution of how this is changed, and we can say that about a lot of different markets, but they look to and are influenced by what happens first in the commercial fitness market in the gyms that we see in every community.
We could do a whole segment on hospitality wellness because it's booming, right? It is absolutely booming. Let's talk about layouts, Greg, and something that you've talked a lot about, which I appreciate, especially given that the stat that we're trying to change at the Fitness Industry Council, which is that, only 17 to 18% of Canadians have gym memberships. And when we look at physical activity levels, the pathways for beginners are necessary for clubs. So can you talk about, how a facility design can seamlessly accommodate both that possibly nervous beginner and also the seasoned gym goer who, you want to satisfy both of them?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's very difficult if the needs of the community coming in and the folks coming in are more diverse, then we almost need to add more to the menu, right? And that's for an operator, that's not necessarily making it simpler. It's making it a little bit more complex and requiring a little bit more thought. But I think one of the words you used in the question is key that we keep coming back to, and that's accommodating. So space, programming, staffing, and an experience in general, which obviously equipment is part of it, that's accommodating to these different levels of fitness, from the beginner trying to come into the gym who may not have had a great experience in the past somewhere else or in their previous life, and trying to come into a situation that can often be intimidating, all the way to the gym goer that's been, where gyms have been part of their lives forever. And we in the industry have to remember that most of us in the industry have been influenced in a positive way in fitness and health and wellness. That's how we got to whatever it is that we're doing from an operator standpoint, or whatever it is that we do within the industry. But that's not most people. Most people don't have a favorable experience with exercise or movement, and we cannot forget about those folks. So the challenge when we open up space and turf and kettlebells and more racks and dumbbells, and how do we not lose sight? That's traditionally the more experienced gym goer, bordering on athlete, someone training, as I just mentioned, towards a goal. Well, how do we not? And the answer there, I think, is in your people and in your programming. How can we introduce programming to folks that are coming back from injury, folks that are coming back that are postnatal, folks that are older, folks that are not had a positive experience. And I think the programming side is part of the key, and the future of how we bridge all of these groups, a more diverse group with diverse needs, into a space where traditionally we haven't had to do that as much. And that's a term that I refer to a lot, is accommodating, equipment that's accommodating to those levels, programming that's accommodating and built for not just those training for high rocks, but maybe for those that might want to consider it one day, if they get down, to a certain path, or those that just want to be able to have more energy and be able to attack the stairs with a little bit more vigor than what you can do going down and up as you get older, without care for how you move and your capacity to do so. So that's really layouts. You start, and a lot of this is related, a lot of this is connected. So layouts are connected to everything that I just said, how you manage the space, and that's connected to the economical realities, and that's connected to the populations that you serve. And we'd love it to be simpler, but it's not necessarily so, unless you realize that those are the variables you need to manage, and then it becomes a little simpler.
Greg, if you were approached by more of a smaller, fitness business, perhaps let's say it's someone with 1 to 3 or maybe in up to 5 locations, and they're not really trying to carve out a specialization for elite athletes or other groups, but perhaps they're just trying to help the general Canadian who wants to live healthier and focus on longevity. How much would you allocate towards the traditional cardiovascular, footprint, versus what percentage would be strength training or even kind of open space, for stretching and recovery and other activities?
Well, they're new into the game, and there's a number of ways that you can move. There's the franchise option, which is not to be dismissed, because there are some strong ones out there that are helping with all of that based on proven recipe. There's the independent route, and then there's the non-for-profit route, etc. But I think the first step is to understand who you're positioned to serve, and how do the economics play out. What are your numbers? What's your demographic? What is the overhead? Where are your revenue streams? Where is your break-even point? How do you negotiate land space to fit your numbers based on that analysis first, rather than any other way? the history of the fitness operator has been falling in love with fitness, and especially on the independent side, and building it based on their passion for fitness and thinking about the economics after. We can't afford to do that now. We have to look at I could tell you I have my university degrees in education, but I have a real life MBA in the realities of economics now, working for a global company, but owning my own business and reading financial reports and negotiating with landlords and human resources. So at the end of the day, you have to be sustainable financially, and that we cannot overstep. Everybody understands. It goes back to our first question. Then once you look at that, you have to dovetail that with who your target market is to retain the flexibility, especially in a smaller community, to serve different populations. If you have the elite athlete in the higher end, I'll call them higher end, high training age person on one end, you also have the kids or the beginners at an older age bracket on the other end, and everybody in between. I'm not sure you can cater to the average gym goer anymore. I think you have to be able to be diverse enough to go into these different groups, and that's how I would plan it. I would plan on diversity. When you look at square footage, well, let's look at the history. The history of square footage and your financial investment was what, 80, 70% on cardio years ago? It's nowhere near that now. So, and equipment vendors would love for it to go back to that area, because financially it's a higher ticket value, and financially there's more room for sustainability, profitability on that side. But from an operator side today, there's much less percentage dedicated to cardio. There's more percentage dedicated to group, another percentage that's increased related to strength, and they're more even now. They're not overwhelmingly one side. And now we've got this emerging category of recovery. So, and dedicated space for that. And it's part of these diverse requests that are coming in, that if you want to play in this space, you have to have some boxes checked. And back in the day, I go back in the day, there wasn't even cardio. It was Nautilus machines back in the 70s and 80s. Or you go to a Gold's Gym or something where there was a lot of free weight, and there was the racks and the benches and the dumbbells, and they had dumbbells heavier than everywhere else. There were two distinct categories, and there was the racket club. And then you look all the way to how it's evolved to where it is today. And some of it's come back to that, but it's all within one facility they're asking for. They don't want just the racket club. They want some things within a facility. They want functional strength. They want cardio. They want recovery. They want group. They want some classes. They want some instructions. They want some diversity to what they're experiencing, and that diversity can cater to different folks. So in terms of percentages, Zach, I'd say it's much more balanced based on the economics of, and how much balanced based on the economics that is driving the plan from the get-go. But where we are economically and where we are maturity level for an industry is forcing us to be more well-rounded as operators. It's forcing us to be less specialized but almost, well, I don't know how to, more specialized in multiple areas. You have to be someone who wears a lot of different hats. And if you don't feel comfortable with the financial side, bring somebody on that does. Because the organizations that are thriving today are driven by people who are connected with the financial realities, and then they're mapping out their offering in conjunction with that. And for as long as I can remember, we've always discussed with the folks I've dealt with over the years that you need to merge those two areas, the trends in the industry, but you can't sacrifice finance, and you can't just think of finance only on a spreadsheet. You can't run facilities only based on what the spreadsheet says. You have to be tied into the realities of what the market is asking you to do. And the skill is in the recipe. It's not just the ingredients. It's like making a cake. You can get the recipe, the best recipe in the world, but how you put it all together and the time you take and how careful you are and the attention to detail is how the cake's going to turn out. And That's very much what we're into, not just in fitness, but in business in general. And you look at what's thriving in sustainability, profitability, in a complicated industry, in a competitive marketplace, that's what's thriving, is attention to detail on what the market is asking for in that offering, combined with the financials. So long-winded answer, my apologies, but hopefully it puts a little context to what percentage should go here, there. Well, it's connected to everything else that I just mentioned. The scenarios, the variables, and that's what's exciting, right? So, it depends. We'd love to give a black and white, this is the recipe. But the reality is, based on where you're located, based on your history, based on your access to funds, based on your staffing, there's all these variables that go into play. And
Right now, 1 in 3 members cancels every year, half of new joiners leave within 6 months, and acquiring a new one costs up to 25 times more than keeping them. The chains winning on retention are the ones investing in technology. Fitness KPI is your technology partner, built by fitness experts with 30 years of experience managing chains like yours. We centralize your data, apply AI, and turn it into automatic actions: retention, revenue, operations, growth. Over 1,500 clubs across 26 countries are already working this way. The technology is ready. Are you? Fitness KPI, from data to action.
Sorry, I was just going to build on that to say, it really highlights the importance of the data that you mentioned earlier, Greg.
100%.
And, as the association, we're collecting some of that data with some of our partners and have a plan to share some somewhat benchmarking, metrics from a financial perspective so that people can get a sense of, are they allocating the appropriate amount of, resources financially to marketing and HR and acquisition costs and so forth.
Yeah, it's data collection, data analysis. I tell you, you want to go from, running a small or medium-sized business privately to working for a global company. You better get used to data and sharing data and justifying decisions based on data rather than just instinct. If your instinct is solid, the data will back it up. And hopefully your instinct follows the data rather than, and I think I've seen a lot of mistakes over the years where the passion overwhelms the data of what is real, what is a reality of investing X amount into a facility or a business or an offering without the proper data to back it up. And those are the folks that are doing well and again thriving. They're using data.
Yeah.
They don't make decisions without data. I can tell you that right now.
No stories without numbers and no numbers without stories.
Yeah. You got it.
I can, before I go to the next question, I can chime in. What I wanted to say is that at a conference we were at with a well-known franchise a couple of years ago, in Quebec, the franchise owner had opened up, and it was a very young Gen Z, almost Gen Alpha membership, and they were throwing dumbbells on. They were having a lot of problems, and then a $9.99 HVLP opened down the street, and they were like, "How are we going to compete with that?" And they pivoted within a month to 50 plus. 60 plus. And within 3 months, they were full. And they just completely pivoted their model and everything that they were doing. And I thought that was a very interesting when you just said that about data, Greg. It was just like, that was a very interesting and quick decision, quick thinking on their feet.
I'll say this, that one of the exciting things about our industry in 2026 as we sit here on June 18th is there's never been a better time where consumers will pay for what we offer. The caveat is they have to see the value. So we see, for example, membership prices ranging from very low to a few $100s more, thousands more per month, all in our markets right today. So the consumer will pay more if they see value. That doesn't apply to a lot of industries, and it hasn't always applied to fitness. It was always governed by price. What's my membership? What's my cost? That's where I'll decide to go. And then people realize that maybe that's a good option, maybe that's not a good option. But because they're much more informed today, and there's more information out there on different levels of offering, where our industry's more mature and our consumers more mature, and they're willing to pay. But they have to see the value. And so our task is to provide that value where it's needed, and to be cost conscious where it's needed as well, and regardless on what role we play within the industry.
So, piggybacking on that, what role does equipment aesthetics and how the space looks and feel play in member retention from what you're seeing on the ground? Like, does a beautiful redesign really move the needle on member satisfaction and member
Depends who your
retention?
client is, right? So if your client is a demographic of high school to university age, it may just be access to a facility, and aesthetics and lighting and paint and um, um, cleanliness of equipment and updated nature of it. And that might be secondary to how many dumbbells they have. And, in terms of what weight area. So it depends who your client is. But if you look at the majority of the market, you define what aesthetics means of the facility. I can tell you from being in thousands of facilities for a long, long time all over the world, and it's one of my passions to be able to, and blessings to be able to live an active lifestyle. And I'm legitimately curious to go into a facility in Germany and in Western Canada and Eastern Canada and Quebec and see what goes on. I could tell you that cleanliness is part of aesthetics. People greeting you with a smile at the front door is part of aesthetics. Seeing different demographics smile and having music that's not exclusive playing in the background as opposed to inclusive is part of aesthetics. And yeah, we think equipment plays a role with that, but it doesn't have to be new equipment. It could be, simply equipment that's clean, functional, feels right, durable. There's no out of order signs, et cetera, et cetera. So aesthetics and space management's becoming more and more important. But what drives it is who your client is. What also drives it is who else is offering what you're offering in your market. Have we ever seen a time where there's more options for the consumer in commercial fitness from small town Canada to the bigger areas? Then you factor in what's available online with getting courses, and what's available in the home equipment market. Those are thriving. So there's a lot of choices people have, and I believe the fundamentals are clean, spacious, well lit, friendly people, and you feel comfortable. You feel like it's for me and for those that are active in on a regular basis, going to a facility, you either feel comfortable or you don't. Things are wobbly when you get on them. They're dirty. They're it's just not as comfortable as if something were clean and people friendly, saying hi when you come in. How are you? Great to see you. Like, that's fundamental, and I don't think hopefully that'll never go away. I think we've seen more personality and need for that than in today's day and age than ever before. And I don't think it's ever going to go away. I think it's still going to be needed because there's less opportunities for people to connect. I mean, go into your grocery store, there's less opportunities to talk to the cashier, just as an example, or in-store help. So I think aesthetics and that part of your question and space management, it's all connected. It's all connected.
So let's talk about that equipment for a minute, Greg. And when you're thinking about buying a new piece of equipment, obviously there's the price, but what else should decision makers think about beyond just the initial price when they're considering a piece of equipment?
Well, first and foremost, the need, right? What the goal is for any kind of piece of equipment. The finance side of things, the car industry has done a great job over the last 30 or 40 years of taking sticker price away and talking about monthly payment. How much of the market, when we go to buy a car, do we think about monthly payment and what we can afford for what we need, as opposed to, putting out $40,000 for a new car. So that's a big change from where our parents were, where my parents were. It was you put it out of pocket, and maybe you'd get maybe you get some financing. So I think you have to look at the financial component and tie that into the need. And then there's a list of 12 to 15 things that I would say that have to be on everybody's procurement, purchasing, acquisition checklist. And that includes who your vendor is. Have they been around for a while? What's the reputation? That includes the actual piece of equipment itself. Not, is it something that caters to the different populations, diverse populations, or is very specific? We've seen lots of pieces of equipment come into the industry that look great and nobody uses them because they're either too difficult or it's not intuitive or it's intimidating or whatever the case may be. So we have to consider the need. We have to consider who we're trying to cater to. We have to consider how to manage the financial side. And then we have to consider everything that goes into bringing the equipment in the facility, moving old equipment out, making space, managing that. Then the equipment itself in terms of the functionality, the durability, the reputation, the warranty, the preventative maintenance, keeping it clean. Is it easy? Is it complicated? Who the vendor is? So there's a whole list all the way to what happens to when you think about making space, what can you get anything for the equipment that's going out? And how do I make sure I can get something when I need to do that down the road? Right. And that comes into equipment that, again, feels right, stands the test of time, is serviceable, is backed by a reputable organization. And there are many. We're one of many. There's lots of great organizations out there, but there's also an influx of groups that we've never heard of until the last couple of years. And will they be here in a couple of years? We don't know. They may bring a great offer to the table, but if they don't have appropriate certifications, then liability becomes an issue. Are you liable for an electrical malfunction on your treadmill? Or is the organization? Well, it shouldn't be you, other than the requirements of putting something like that in your facility. There's electrical requirements you have to comply with, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say there's a checklist. If anybody wants to message me directly, track me down, social media or through FIC. I'll share with you a procurement checklist that is whether it's cardio strength, whatever it is that you should be looking for, and it's not to one brand or another. It's simply designed when I go by look for a car, I have a checklist of what I look for now, having purchased or acquired cars for many, many years. Same with other things that we add. We don't buy washing machines very often, so it might be a little bit different when I go buy a washing machine. I'm not really sure what the procurement checklist would be for that. I haven't bought one in a while. So I think there are some standards and things that you need to look at towards the goals that we've talked about. And it starts with managing the finance, just like the economic realities portion of what we've discussed. And then looking at making sure it will allow you to get the return on investment and serve the community the way you need them to be served so that your organization can thrive.
What a great resource that would be to have that procurement
Yeah,
checklist.
we could.
And just a follow-up to that, Greg, are there certain times of the year that are best if somebody really needs kind of hand-holding in terms of making decisions on equipment where your team or perhaps others might have more capacity to help?
There was a time when we would say that. The reality is this day and age of 24/7, 365. No, I think whenever the timing is right, the operator knows the cycles of when things get busy and traditionally it was always after Labor Day and after New Year's, right? So those were the two times, which meant that traditionally leading up to Labor Day, August was our busiest month on one end of the year, and December was our busiest month on the other end of the year. I would fast forward to where we are today and say, no, there's all times are good. There's lots of people within an organization that can assist with lots of experience. And again, the perspective of the vendor, regardless of which vendor, and there are multiple really good ones. If you follow a checklist, that checklist will help you dismiss some and qualify others. but it's more based on what they can help you with. And they do have a lot of great perspective and experience out there in terms of financing and layouts and trade-ins and electrical requirements. And, like now we're into technology and what is your site preparedness. And there's a lot more that goes into it than just, hey, I need to go in and I need to add this and that. So anytime is really good. We like to keep Sundays for family, maybe some Saturdays, but other than that, I think we're in a good spot.
Awesome.
And actually, Greg, you sort of touched upon this, but can you briefly talk about what the total cost of ownership really means and why that's necessary for purchasing conversations?
Well, it isn't always, I think necessary is in the eye of the beholder, right? If the beholder, the procurement of those folks adding equipment see value in understanding the cost of ownership, then it is necessary. What is the cost of ownership? It's basically the costs. What are the anticipated costs of keeping a piece of equipment on the floor? We know there's a cost to taking up square footage. If you're in the lower mainland, or in parts of downtown Toronto where square footage is higher than other areas in the country, that putting something in across this many square feet is going to cost. Now, I should just be looking for an equipment with a strong warranty, right? That should limit my cost of ownership. Yes, to a point. Warranty is limited by how you maintain your equipment, right? Warranty is limited. The cost of ownership is also factored in the cost of bringing it in through the doors and the trade-in value at the very end and everything that goes in between. So when we look at, for example, some financing options with folks, many of our organizations are very, very interested in how do I wrap it all into one price so that I don't have to worry about the next 5 years, any cost of ownership, any cost spike or unforeseen expense, because that is the absolute worst for an operator, right? All of a sudden you need $2,000 for a new lower board on a treadmill. What? Well, how do I make sure that never happens? So cost of ownership covers it all from A to Z. And that would be part of this, what to consider at the front end, rather than just, and again, I go back to the car analogy. I'm looking at, I don't know about you folks, but I'm looking at what this is going to cost me for the next 4 to 6 years, not what the price is just up front. And that warranty, access to maintenance. When I need to bring the car in, where do I bring it in? Is it close? Is it far? Will they give me, a loaner for the day if I need to get brakes fixed? Or what is the typical life for brakes? So these concepts can be applied to fitness equipment and should be, because we're in the business, yes, of fitness, but we're also in the business of being around for a while, of being sustainable. And without being sustainable, you have to manage your expenses the same way you do in your own household. So we take that kind of approach and have that discussion. And we have customers who have enough experience, they don't need our help. And we have other customers who want that help, or at least what's new on that side that can be offered. And again, COVID in the last few years has really upset the apple cart on what's available for folks on the financing side. So we've worked very, very hard to be able to provide some things that give people more options so they can make the best decision for their situation.
Greg, you've got such a unique and interesting perspective because you're in so many different facilities across the country and truly globally. Curious from your perspective about something you touched on earlier with regards to some of these specialized zones. We think about recovery zones, compression spaces, percussion therapy, massage chairs. Would you say that this is starting to become standard expectation for the average gym goer consumer? Or would you say that as of 2026, we still consider these more a premium or boutique luxury?
I think it's somewhere in between, Zach. I think it's a great question because, again, looking at what the market and what folks are asking for, they're not necessarily, I think, in every facility asking for this when they go into a facility. But when they go into a facility and see that there's some space dedicated to recovery, and then they have, back to my earlier comment about lots of information available to them, they know recovery is important. Well, there's nothing too sexy about just sleeping, although that's the best recovery tool is getting enough sleep. Well, maybe I could do something here on days where I don't push as hard. Well, oh, they have those chairs over there. And let's dig into. So I think it's slowly becoming a standard item, the same way that, back kettlebells at one point weren't standard in facilities. Turf areas weren't standard in facilities or areas to move functionally. So we had people doing lunges in between pieces of cardio, and well, that's evolved. I think it's part of the evolution to a more diverse demand from the market. I don't think it's necessarily luxury. I think it's a nice to have category. Does it need to have? Again, it goes back to analyzing the market and how to create value for those that you want to serve to hit your financial targets so you're sustainable. Um, I could tell you it creates another level of connection for people coming to the facilities more than 2 or 3 times a week. They'll come in for maybe some mobility, light cardio, and recovery. That wasn't happening before. People were coming in for 2 to 3 times a week of going hard and going home. Now maybe they're coming in 5 times a week. And again, it's that connection, it's that experience, it's that value creation. It's one way to create it, but it's also created another learning curve for operators to figure out how do we manage that? How is that all inclusive, special membership? What do we, and we've now, as part of our company, really, we have a manufacturing and a massage chair division that's been making chairs since 1954. So but not for the fitness market, right? So it's relatively new for the fitness market, and then implemented has to be some considerations that I think we can help with. And I think it's worth considering because every piece of floor space has a cost. So how does it make sense? Does it make sense? Should we think about it? Not think about it. But I can tell you these condos and hotels, and they're putting in massage chairs for the first time ever. So I think there's something there. I think it's a nice to have, and I think it'll continue to evolve.
So let's talk about long-term success, which is increasingly tied to operational performance. How can operators better leverage the data that's generated by connected fitness equipment to optimize their business and improve their member engagement?
Well, performance has always been critical, right? So the thought that it's not or something recent, it's not. It's all if you're in the whether you're in the for-profit or not if you have expenses and need to have revenue exceeding expenses, that's performance. You need to perform. You need to have that. So that the long how do operators leverage the data from fitness equipment? I would start with getting data to leverage from whatever source works. That's where I would start. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier about having data points, analyzing data points. So, back in the day, entrepreneurs would open up facilities based on demographics, based on competition, based on what the market size was, based on the average income, based on, what's around and accessibility and parking availability and all of these things goes into their data analysis. Now we're talking about analysis from people coming within the doors and how can we use that to keep them coming and how can we use that for new member recruitment. And I think we need to have data points that we can look at, and fitness equipment can be one source of that. So we have some, and a lot of vendors have a point of reference where connected fitness equipment can give you data to make more informed decisions, better decisions for the benefit of your organization. And everybody, if you go with something related to connected, thinks about entertainment for the consumer. Yeah, that's almost that's almost a prerequisite, but it's what data can the operator gain from their equipment and the usage to better leverage that asset and speak to everything we've just talked about: the economics, the retention, the member experience, the diversity of the needs. How can you do that? And that's definitely worth exploring and definitely being explored more and more. Like we look at the university market, and it's really divided into two categories: those that want the data and the experience, and those that just want to keep it very simple and not. And there's no right or wrong answer. It's who are you catering to? And we've seen some dramatic changes in organizations that choose either one of those paths. They just have to be committed to it and understand all of the points. And maybe you get data from other areas. But if we go back to recovery for a second as an example, we see organizations in Canada getting thousands and thousands and thousands of visits per month on massage chairs. Well, that data tells us something. And if we go back to the original premise that what's happening in facilities tends to set the standard for what happens in either other facilities, other communities, or there are some leaders, then there are some others that look at the market. Well, that tells me where that category is going, because the value the consumer sees in those, then they're paying for it, is telling us that this is a trend that we need to consider moving forward. So how do you get that data of knowing there's this many visits to this area? How do you get data that knows how much area your free weight area is getting? How much traffic is your dumbbell rack adjustable bench area getting? It's not just connected equipment. So we have, ideas and solutions there that we could talk about if that's of interest. But I do think where we're going is as this industry matures, is we need to find more ways to get data, look at the data, and then make better decisions to reduce the learning curve and the chance of mistakes. Because every mistake costs more money than it ever has, right? And we don't have to look very far in any industry to see, how much money certain mistakes have cost certain organizations in other industries. And the same applies in fitness.
Good data supports good business decisions. There's no question about that. And certainly the FIC at an industry sector level is aggregating some of that data to help with benchmarking. But certainly the individual business needs its own data, and the facility needs data. And a shout out to one of our latest suppliers at the Fitness Industry Council, LensView, a Canadian company, is looking to support organizations that may not have connected equipment with that ability to gain data within their facilities. But we're almost at 2 o'clock Eastern time. We have an important football match to watch later today with Canada. But I've got one final question for you, Greg, and it's when clubs look to upgrade or refresh their equipment, what are the most common mistakes that you see regarding asset management and timing?
I think some of those we've talked about them previously. The biggest missteps is that I see is not considering all the factors that we've mentioned on the economic side. So how to manage the investment, what's the anticipated return, what's the plan for that? Is there any training required for us to be able to get the ROI we need? Is the equipment decision based on personal preference of the buyer, or is it based on demand that they're seeing from the marketplace? Not calculating cost of ownership and costs in year 2, 3, 4, and 5. not looking longer term rather than just immediate. We need to get this in and we need to do it, and not taking the time to plan. I think those are some of the areas that are the most common mistakes that we've seen, and certainly where we when we're asked to, we'll consult folks down that road and take your time. If you don't have time, we'll expedite the process, but let's, the decision making process today impacts financially down the road. The same way that if you rented out a space that was twice more than you should pay, you're never giving your organization a chance to succeed. So that economic reality that was asked on question one is driving a lot of the missteps that I see.
Well, a common theme that runs through. Greg, we can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your busy schedule. We know you are exceptionally busy with the work that you do, leading not just Matrix Fitness Canada, but Johnson Health Tech. And on behalf of the Fitness Industry Council of Canada, we greatly appreciate your ongoing and committed support from Matrix to help the Fitness Industry Council do what we do to advocate as the voice of the fitness sector with government. So thank you for that.
Thanks for having me. And I just want to say before we close real quick that it's always a great day to be able to talk about fitness, health, and wellness and the industry that we're in. It's something that's driven and drives a lot of us that are on this call. For you folks to take time is much appreciated. But most importantly, I want to thank Fitness Industry Council of Canada. So one of the reasons Matrix feels so strongly about our support is that we feel extremely strong about increasing the profile of the role that we all play in the lives of Canadians. And it'll be a great day when we see some tax subsidies coming for memberships, et cetera. And I know that without Fitness Industry Canada, that's almost impossible to do. So the lobbying efforts, the work behind the scenes, the increasing the profile and the relevance of what we do as an industry, regardless of the logo on our shirts and the badge that we wear and the role that we play, I think is extremely important for the sustainability of what we all do and for ourselves and for our future generations. So thanks for the good work you're doing, Aaron's doing, and the council in general. And kudos to the organizations that contribute. It's something we're very, very passionate about. So much thank you, much gratitude back to you folks.
Thank you so much, Greg, and to all the attendees, thanks for being with us today. And we will be taking a short break from our webinars in July and August, but stay tuned. We will be back in September. But in the meantime, please check out our YouTube channel and podcast streaming to stay connected with us. And again, if you haven't yet joined the Fitness Industry Council, we can use all of your support. And Aaron and I would be happy to speak with any of you at any time. So thank you all.